One of the major battles of the entire Second World War was fought in Russia at a place called Stalingrad. 500,000 men fought in this brutal, savage struggle for a city.
It is spring 1942. Waving aside the advice of his generals, whom he has come to hate, Adolf Hitler orders his own summer offensive in Russia. Not at the main Soviet armies before Moscow, but a two-pronged drive in the south. One through Stalingrad, then swinging north behind Moscow. The second, initially more important, into the rich Caucasus. This will sever Russia's transportation lifeline, isolate her factories and armies. The oil of Baku will be his. American and British Lend-Lease supplies will be choked off. The drive begins on June 28, 1942. By the end of July, the first German panzers have reached the Don River. By mid-August, Stalingrad, Pittsburgh of the Soviet Union, lives in acute peril. Fresh reserves are thrown in. Stalin, hearing that industrial plants are being dismantled, telephones from Moscow, "Stop this evacuation at once." The city of more than 500,000 faces to the panzers, backs to the Volga, digs in. Germans moved towards Stalingrad, across the Great Plain between the Don and Volga rivers. Two armies, Hermann Holt's crack 4th Panzer and Friedrich Paulus's elite 6th, battle-hardened in Holland, Belgium, and France. Facing the Germans is the 62nd Siberian Army of General Vasily Chuikov, under the overall command of Marshal Timoshenko. A German tank is hit. Russian tanks are no match for the panzers. Veteran German gunners score heavily. Soviet armored losses soar. Badly mauled, the Red Army is forced to pull back to stronger defensive lines near the city. The Wehrmacht sweeps forward past dispirited masses of Russian prisoners. By now, Hitler has changed his primary objective from the Caucasus to Stalingrad. He has ordered Paulus's entire 6th Army, 235,000 men, to march straight for the city. The German salient, jutting out fist-like, flanks exposed, surges into the Russian heartland. Ahead, the Volga, and Hitler remembers the ancient Russian dictum, "He who crosses the Volga conquers the motherland, for beyond the Volga there is nothing." August 23rd, 1942. Message to Hitler's headquarters. Battle Group 79th Panzer Grenadier Regiment, first German troops to reach the Volga, 1835 hours. The same day, Hermann Goering's Luftwaffe, mediums and Stukas, delivers the first devastating mass bombing raid on Stalingrad itself. August 31st, Germans 18 miles from Stalingrad. September 3rd, 10 miles. The final 10 miles take the Germans exactly 11 battering days. German tank veterans who slashed across Poland's wide plains, German infantrymen who slogged across France's pleasant farms, jam into Stalingrad's narrow, treacherous streets, mined ahead of them by the Russians. The Russians deploy and the battle rages, the Red Army in the buildings, the German army in the streets. The Germans penetrate to the heart of the city and capture the commanding heights of Mamayev Kurgan, a strategic site that will change hands several times. From mid-September to mid-October, the Russian position is critical. Red reinforcements, the 13th Guards Rifle Division, are moved across the Volga to join the defenders of the city. General Zhukov has replaced Timoshenko as overall theater commander. From now on, the major buildup will not be in the city itself, but north and south of Stalingrad, on the German salient's flanks, where Zhukov is planning a great offensive counterstroke. The do-or-die defense of Stalingrad is entrusted to General Chuikov and his Siberian army. Some of the most appalling hand-to-hand fighting in history takes place in Stalingrad's rubble. Red snipers are everywhere. During 66 days of siege warfare, the Russians cling to some vital strongholds, such as the Red October factory blocking the main shortcut road to the Volga. The tractor plant, despite the raging battle, produces 150 armored cars and 200 tanks in September. Frustrated, Hitler orders storming of the city to cease. He will reduce it to rubble, first by air bombing, then by artillery. the battle's height, it is estimated that 10,000 tons of metal, on the average, is dropped on every mile of the Stalingrad front. Now comes what the Germans call the Rattenkrieg, the Rat War, as the Wehrmacht fights its way through the ruins of the broken city. And in Berlin, Hitler proclaims, "I wanted to take the place, and do you know, we've pulled it off. We've got it, really, except for a few enemy positions still holding out." He is almost right. Much of the city, even part of the Red October factory, is his. It is November 9th. It is 10 days from disaster. The Russians are pinched into a narrow strip at Stalingrad, but the Germans are in a trap. North and south of their salient, they have entrusted their flanks to weak Romanian, Hungarian, and Italian troops. Here, the Russians plan to strike in force, a 62-mile pincer movement to envelop and isolate the 4th Panzer and 6th Armies. The dread Russian winter has come. The attack is perfectly timed, after the first strong frosts which harden the ground, before the heavy snows which clog maneuver. November 19th, 1942. The Germans know the envelopment is still thin, vulnerable to a breakout. Paulus asks it. Fortress Stalingrad, as Hitler calls the encircled city, must be abandoned. 300,000 men wait while a tug of war goes on at headquarters. Goering is presenting his own scheme to Hitler. His Luftwaffe generals have told him it is impossible, but Goering insists he can airlift 500 tons a day to Stalingrad's airfields and maintain the surrounded army. Hitler eagerly accepts this, refuses to sign an already prepared message ordering Paulus to break out. The airlift is a disaster. The Luftwaffe loses 10 planes a day. Overworked German pilots take pep pills to keep awake. 6th Army to Luftwaffe, supply by air completely inadequate. Delivery of such small amounts can lead to serious crises. Not until December 12th is seemingly realistic relief attempted. Hitler orders Field Marshal Erich von Manstein's Army Group Don, 110 miles southwest of Stalingrad, to break the ring and relieve the fortress. Code name for the operation, Winter Gale. Manstein fights to within 30 miles of Stalingrad, but Paulus does not break out to meet him. Hitler has forbidden it. And even after link-up, there is to be no evacuation. Stalingrad must be held. Manstein is to pump men and munitions into the city. This military lunacy destroys Paulus's last chance. The Russians counterattack. Von Stein's relief is smashed. A ring of death now encircles Stalingrad. Within the city itself, the Germans still have to fight pockets of the original Russian defenders. January 8, 1943, the Russians send emissaries to the Germans, calling on them to surrender, guaranteeing safety to all who cease hostilities and upon the termination of the war, their return to Germany. Paulus refuses to see them. Hitler orders that any more emissaries shall be fired on. Stalin vows total annihilation. The Russians capture Stalingrad's major airfields. Goering's airlift is now all but useless. The Luftwaffe tries to parachute supplies in despite heavy Russian flank. Message to Hitler's headquarters. The army starves and freezes and has nothing to shoot and can no longer move its tanks. Even in good weather, what is promised is not delivered. The temperature falls to 28 below zero. Medical supplies run out. The seriously wounded are left outside to freeze painlessly to death. The army's horses become standard fare in the food kitchens. The Germans retreat, the feared and fatal way, eastward into the center of the Stalingrad cauldron. And as they do, the Russian radio broadcasts this message to them in German. Every 7 seconds, a German soldier dies in Russia. Stalingrad, mass grave.
Jede 7. Sekunde stirbt ein deutscher Soldat in Russland. Stalingrad, Massengrab. Stalingrad, Massengrab. Stalingrad, Massengrab.
On January 30th, Hermann Goering broadcasts to the men of Stalingrad. A soldier who goes into battle must know that he will probably not return. If he does come back, he should be thankful for his good fortune. On January 31st, Stalingrad replies, "Premature funeral orations are not appreciated here." Goering's message is not very premature. On February 2nd, the 73rd day of encirclement, all resistance ends. Russian treatment of German prisoners is severe, typical of a battle marked by atrocities on both sides. There is no Geneva Convention at Stalingrad. On the Eastern Front, this is the turning point. One of history's decisive battles, as decisive as the Marne, Verdun, the Battle of Britain, is over. From this point on, the Red Army will move constantly westward, toward the Danube, the Oder, and the Elbe. With it will march Soviet communism and the torments of a divided post-war world. An important functionary in the Ukraine, then virtually unknown outside of Russia, will later direct communism's destinies. At Stalingrad, he kisses victorious General Chuikov. His name, Nikita Khrushchev. "24 German generals surrender. Hours before, Hitler has hastily promoted one of them, Friedrich Paulus, to field marshal for one reason. No German field marshal has ever permitted himself to be taken prisoner. Paulus's surrender, unconditionally, takes 10 minutes. Paulus himself will remain a prisoner for 10 years, until 1953. And the German novelist, Theodore Plivier, has written, "Here was the lost battle of the lost war, where the need of the hour had been courageous defiance of the rulers, 24 generals had clicked their heels as one man. Where revolt should have flared up in the masses of the soldiers, there had been nothing but physical and spiritual dissolution, apathy, a dumb dying without even a curse on their lips." 123,000 Germans, less than half of Fortress Stalingrad, live to be captured. Of these, 50,000 die on the roads to Siberia or in typhus-ridden Russian prison camps. Since the war, fewer than 5,000 have been returned to Germany.